I wanted to make a really short video talking about what's going on with the gaming industry right now, because the recent scandal with the game developer Unity has blown up, and aside from it being something trendy for me to talk about to get that sweet, luscious boost from the algorithm, I also think it's important to take a quick peek at what's happening more broadly because of the implications it has for the future of gaming as a medium of entertainment. So, before I get into the meat of it, I need to point out that this video isn't going to be some big deep dive expose into the corporate rot of the gaming industry or a dissection of all the headlines that have been plaguing it for the past several years, because making a video like that would be hours long and take a lot of time and research to make, and I don't feel like doing that because laziness completes me. In all seriousness though, I just wanted to give my thoughts on the broad strokes of the trends we keep seeing with big game developers and distributors, and the unique ways in which it's affecting gaming, not only as a business, but also as an artistic medium. Even if you don't keep up with gaming news specifically, chances are that if you surf the internet on a regular basis, you've probably come across a number of videos of people talking about the situation with Unity. Unity Technologies is a company responsible for a gaming engine that supports a large library of games like Pokemon Go, Cuphead, Beat Saber, Genshin Impact, and many others, as well as having applications in virtual reality and cinema, such as its use in the recent 2019 remake of The Lion King. And without getting too deep into the details, let's just say Unity has recently gotten up to some pretty sussy behavior. And by sussy behavior, I mean charging game distributors and platforms a fee every time someone installs a game on their device. Let me break that down real quick so you can understand just how scummy a business policy that actually is. Let's imagine you're at a furniture store, and you want to decide whether or not to buy a chair for your living room. You'd probably take a seat in it just to feel it out and see if it's a comfortable fit, right? Now imagine if the makers of that chair charged the furniture store a fee for every single time somebody sat in that chair without even selling it. That's basically what Unity has done, but with their games, which means that, theoretically, if someone were feeling particularly mischievous, they could download and install a game, then uninstall it, and reinstall it, and then keep repeating that process infinitely. And every time that person did this, the platform that sells the games would have to then pay Unity a back fee for each individual installment. A single person with enough time and determination and malice in their hearts could bankrupt the distributors just by doing this over and over and over again. Now, you might be thinking, wow, that sounds like some bull. And it is. And now you know why so many people have been talking about it. I'm not going to pretend that I'm saying anything new or profound by pointing out the fact that greed has a detrimental effect on artistic media. The entertainment industry has long been a gravity well of some of the most egregious instances of corporate greed in the modern era, which is largely due to the fact that we live in an entertainment economy now. You don't have to look very hard to find instances where the insatiable drive for profits at any expense affects the quality of movies, TV shows, music, literature, and every other kind of media. But there's something particularly cancerous about the way greed operates in the gaming industry that I think needs to be addressed. Something like the Unity incident is sadly not very uncommon. In fact, that level of greed and consumer abuse has started to become pretty much normalized, whether it be standard industry practices like stuffing a game full of microtransactions to squeeze a bunch of money out of addicted players and children for what usually amounts to worthless bits of data that don't enhance or alter the gameplay experience in any meaningful way, or whether it's toxic work environments ripe with mistreatment and sexual harassment like at Blizzard, or whether it's the vicious copyright abuse by companies like Nintendo to stifle any sort of creativity by fans that they disapprove of. Major game developers have shown time and time again that they are more ravenous in their lust for money than most. I'm pretty sure some of the things these companies have done would make even corporations like Disney and Apple blush. So, okay. But why? What makes the gaming industry so prone to the worst excesses of capitalism, and why are we seeing this now? The gaming industry didn't used to have these problems. Sure, there was executive meddling and shortcuts in profiteering like there is in any other lucrative market. But if you grew up in the mid-2000s or earlier, you didn't have to deal with microtransactions or botched day one releases, or parts of the game getting shoved into DLC that you had to purchase separately. What's noteworthy about the industry today isn't just how bad the greed has gotten, but how quickly it got this bad. Even the film industry, which is one of the most corrupt industries in the American economy, doesn't usually stoop so low as to charge moviegoers for every single time they watch a movie on streaming, and the film industry has been around at least in some form for well over a century. So what is it about games that has driven this enormous spike in corporate profiteering and abuse? I think one answer lies in the speed with which gaming has evolved as a medium. Games have grown at a far more accelerated pace than any other form of storytelling media in history. It took cinema over 100 years to achieve in terms of technological innovation and capacity for artistic expression what the gaming industry has accomplished in only a few decades. And as marvelous as that kind of growth is, it doesn't come without a heavy price tag, both figuratively and literally. And when you have an industry that explodes that quickly, you're bound to see a proportional increase in this kind of abuse, because the types of investors that flock to take advantage of that boom are more likely to originate outside of the industry, with little experience in or connection to the industry, and who don't have a vested interest in the long-term growth or sustainability of the medium. The gaming industry is the greatest gold rush of the modern era. There are gonna be a lot of people who barge in just to take some of that gold and run. Unfortunately, that tendency has disastrous consequences for the industry and the people who do have a vested interest in its long-term progress. One of these that really worries me is the problems it creates for game conservation. The last 15 years have seen a major switch in the industry towards business models that prioritize mobile games and MMOs and other types of games based in online servers that are designed to have very finite lifespans, and few companies make any effort to preserve the data in those games after they go offline, because from their perspective, what would be the point? Once a game stops actively making money, then it's as good as garbage to the developers, or more specifically, the shareholders. There's no incentive to preserve those games. And because the shareholders and executives at many of these companies are only interested in profiteering and not in the sustainability of the gaming industry or the welfare of their companies beyond the extent to which they can turn a profit, a lot of these titles often get lost to the dustbin of history. And that's a tragic waste. There have been other content creators in the online space, like some ordinary gamers, that have spoken up about this problem and the need to address the importance of preservationism, and how we need to protect games as cultural artifacts when companies would rather just delete them from existence to save a little extra money. But I think that conversation needs to be more widespread than it currently is. And so should the conversation about all the rot that's going on behind the scenes in this industry, and sometimes even right out in the open, because the two problems are deeply connected. And sure, I get it. Gaming is a business first and foremost. And I'm not saying that companies need to start throwing money away on maintaining service for games that aren't making any profit in return. But I do think the abject lack of interest in even trying to find a way to preserve games offline, on top of the way gaming companies like Nintendo crack down on people who are forced to pirate and then emulate those games in order to ensure their continued existence, speaks to the unique type of greed that I've been talking about. When you're literally forcing the public to commit illegal piracy simply so they can do your job and keep the products you've made from vanishing into virtual oblivion, and then hunting them down for it because you run the risk of maybe losing out on a few bucks on a game that you already know has lost its profitability anyway, then something is dangerously wrong with the way the system works, and changes need to be made. Over the last 30 years, we've seen gaming transform from this niche hobby that was only considered suitable for young children into this gigantic economic behemoth that rakes in more revenue per year than every other entertainment industry combined. We've seen games go from 8-bit cartridges that you can zip through in less than an hour to gargantuan state-of-the-art multi-gigabyte epics with life-sized narrative arcs that can take a dedicated player nearly 100 hours sometimes to fully complete. That massive leap in quality necessarily comes with a need for greater capital, which companies often need to get through microtransactions and DLC and all these other extraneous things just to feed the beast. I think a lot of people in the gaming community have sensed the inherent unsustainability of constantly making games bigger and snazzier and more complex with each passing year, hence the turn over the last decade towards low-budget indie games and fan-made mods. I'm not sure what the future of the industry is, but I think things like the Unity incident should be the latest wake-up call for us to address the graft, corner-cutting, and negligence that's plaguing the gaming world right now. First, I think there needs to be more discourse acknowledging the fact that the kind of internal dysfunction and contempt for users coming from big game developers is excessive even by the standards of the modern entertainment industry, and that legislative changes need to be made to prevent developers and companies from taking advantage of their customers to the degree they've been doing. And second, I think we need to start addressing ways that the gaming community can work toward game preservation, since companies themselves don't seem to want to do it. And if that means having to find more, seafaring measures of doing it, then I think that's morally justifiable. Games are art, and they deserve to be passed down to posterity. No company should have the right to just get rid of them entirely, even if they made them in the first place. I firmly believe that once something is published, it should remain accessible to the broader public, regardless of whether it's profitable or not. I don't think the end of profitability should justify the termination of a work of art under any circumstances, and regardless of what the law might say about it, I don't believe that studios or executives in any industry have a moral right to eliminate those kinds of works from the public space. Because once you allow for that, then you allow for all sorts of other terrible decisions in other industries. Could you imagine, for instance, if one day the J.R.R. Tolkien estate, which owns the rights to The Lord of the Rings and all its associated works, just one day decided to not only cease publication of all of Tolkien's work, but also to remove and erase all access to it forever? Or imagine if the British Museum, which owns many of the world's greatest works of art, just decided to shutter its doors one day and throw every piece of art into the basement, never to be seen again, and then on top of that also engaged in a legal campaign to have every photo of these works removed from the internet and every replica removed from other museums. People would be up in arms if those things were to happen, and rightfully so. What I'm trying to get at is this. There needs to be a limit to the extent to which profit is an acceptable excuse for corporations to ruin art and entertainment for the rest of us. And right now, I really don't think it's acceptable for gamers to have to put up with the kind of manipulation and miserliness that we keep seeing from big developers when no other industry gets away with exercising this level of brazen shiftlessness on their consumers. Why should games be such a vulnerable target for the greed of a few malicious actors? And why should we have to put up with it? I'm not pretending like I have solutions to this problem. I can't give a clear answer on how we solve this issue, but I do think that solutions can come from greater awareness of how bad the abuse has gotten, and what the long-term importance is of fighting against it. Individually, none of us has much power to affect the behavior of multinational corporations, but the gaming community is enormous and ever-growing, and I think with enough communication and coordination, we could see changes come from the ground up that turn things in our favor. Every medium of artistic expression starts out as just a fad or an amusement, and that outlook makes it easier for corporations to abuse and commodify those forms of expression by calling them entertainment. But games are more than that now, and they deserve to be treated with the respect and dignity and care as any work of cinema, literature, music, or art. So this discussion needs to be had, Because the problem with the gaming industry right now is about more than getting stiffed for an extra few bucks here and there, or getting subpar products rushed out the door to meet arbitrary deadlines, or about companies squeezing pennies out of distributors and tanking their own sales in the pursuit of short-term gains. It's about preventing more works of imagination from being lost to time. It's about us as a society respecting this new modern form of storytelling and emotional communication for what it truly is. Even if a game isn't some high work of narrative or artistic genius, even if it mainly is just entertainment, it deserves to be treated with the same care. Early cinema back in the late 19th century was looked at the same way as games were back in the 80s and 90s, and since film wasn't taken seriously as an artistic medium back in those days, countless works were lost or discarded for purely economic reasons, or out of sheer disregard that they could ever represent something more important. We should be wiser than to make that same mistake with games today. Because while it may not seem very important right now to make sure that the most recent MMO or download-only game gets preserved, there will come a time many years, maybe decades from now, when gaming is seen as a respected medium of art on par with cinema and literature, where people with more open minds than us will look back on the things we lost in this time right now, and what those things meant to the history of gaming as an art form. And they'll wonder what could have been saved.